Hi, my name is Tracy Stanley. Welcome to my free class, Stamp Charms. This is a great class and project for the beginner. Somebody new to metalwork, somebody who's been maybe a little afraid to jump into metalwork. Those of you that are beaters that think you can't do metalwork, you can have fun with this project too. What I'm going to show you in this class is how to do some stamp charms on metal and on some pre-made blanks that you can purchase. And I'm going to show you how to do some finish work and that sort of thing. These charms can be used for anything from charm bracelets to putting your name on work that you do. Put them in with your bead work, put it in with your other metal work and wire work. You'll have lots of fun making these charms. Tools that you'll be using for this project are bench block, sandbag, plastic mallet, chain nose plier, flat nose plier, metal shears, an embossing hammer, brass mallet, and the 2-hole punch. You'll also need some design stamps, grafting ruler, metal file, a fine tip marker, and some letter stamps. So for today's project, I'm showing you how to make charms out of 24 gauge sheet metal. You can also get these pre-made blanks, and you'll need some appropriate size jump rings for this project. So I begin with my 24 gauge sheet metal, a grafting ruler, and a fine tip permanent marker. And I'm going to mark out my charm sections. I do this mostly just kind of as a guideline. I can change my mind later, but it gives me something to sort of keep me on track. I use the edge of the ruler as my straight edge, and a grafting ruler allows me to line it up anywhere within this 1-inch section in here. I've just chosen to make some charms at this width. There's no really rhyme or reason to why I decide to do that. After I've marked out some space, I can also mark the center of the metal if I want to, if I'm trying to keep it within a certain size, but that's not completely necessary either. So I'll just stop with this and we'll stamp from here. Your next step is going to be choosing the words that you want to put on your stamps, and I highly recommend that you write out the word before you begin stamping, because I can't tell you how many times I've misspelled a word, not only because I can't spell well, but because I'm so focused on picking up the letter stamps and how I'm going to hit the stamp that I'm not really paying attention to the order that I'm putting my letters on. And so I write out a word that I want to stamp on a piece of paper. Just, it doesn't matter what it is. But even if it's the simplest word, even if it's a 3-letter word, I write it out so I've got it in front of me. Depending on how I'm going to direct my word, whether it's going horizontal or vertical, it may make a difference as to where I start within the word. If I'm going to start and do a charm that's going in the vertical, I'm always going to start with the last letter and work my way to the first letter. And obviously that it's extremely important that I have my letters written out, ready to go, so I can begin stamping and be successful with at least the spelling. So next you're going to stamp your words, and I always stamp my words first before I do any of the design stamps, because there's always a chance that I'm going to make a mistake in spelling, and I don't want to take up all my time with design stamps. I also want to know where my placement of my words are before I decide where the design stamps go. So when you're picking out your stamps to use, and they come in all different sizes and fonts, you're going to look at the end of one of the ends here and look for some kind of mark. Hopefully you've got some stamps that have either the letter on it it might have a slash, or it may not have anything at all. If you have a stamp that doesn't have any kind of marking, and what that's telling you is that should be facing you while you're stamping. If you don't have anything at all, my suggestion is take a little time, do a little homework, and go through each one of the stamps, mark them. I even get a label maker out and put the letter on there so that I know exactly which letter it is. It can just be as simple as a slash with a Sharpie marker, but mark it so you know which way the stamp should be facing. You always want to have the letter, the slash, facing you while you're stamping. So I've brought in my bench block, and I'm going to be stamping on it, and I put that directly down on the table while I'm stamping with any of my letter stamps or my design stamps, rather than using any kind of padding underneath. And I'm bringing my metal in, and I've got my first letter that I'm going to start with, and because I am going to go in the vertical, I'm starting with the last letter, the E. So I begin by placing the stamp onto the metal. Please remember, you want to have the letter going the right direction, so either the letter is facing you, the slash, or the slash that you've made in the stamp yourself. It needs to be sitting straight up and down. I like to rest my little finger right on the metal while I do this. It helps to steady it. And then I am going to use a brass mallet for hitting my stamp. You can also use a household type hammer. So I'm going to start with my first letter. I'm going to place it onto the metal, hold the stamp straight up and down, and then I tell people the best thing to do is to place your hammer just on top of the stamp. Get yourself kind of centered and ready to stamp. That way, when you do raise and strike your stamp, you're not going to be coming from off the stamp, just going straight up and down. My preference is to hit it just one time, and then hopefully you'll get a good clear stamp. I know that this is probably a little bit hard for you to see because it's a little bit shiny, but look at your stamp, look at the letter. If you don't get the whole letter, let's say you're missing the top or the bottom of it, what I do is I place the metal back down onto the block. I work my way back into the grooves that I've created, and then let's just say I'm missing the top. I'm going to tip the stamp that direction, the direction that I maybe missed some of my letter, and then I will actually with the mallet or the hammer. And a lot of times I can get the finished piece that I might have been missing of that letter. It's worth a shot. You know, if it doesn't work, we just move on. We don't make this, you know, a big tragedy if it doesn't work out. But you will eventually get very used to stamping very quickly. So I've got my next letter, and of course I'm paying attention to how I spell here. And the reason that I'm going from the last letter to the first letter is because when I place my next stamp, I can actually see where that letter is that I first stamped. If I'm working the other direction, I mean, you could see just where my hand is, I wouldn't be able to see anything if I started from the first letter. So this way I can see where I am, I can kind of guesstimate where I want that to end up, and then once again put my hammer or mallet on top and strike. I don't get too worked up if my letters aren't perfectly straight. In fact, I would almost prefer them not to be. If you want to have things really straight, then that might mean you need to take and do, you know, use your marker, make a straight line. Another suggestion that I have had is take some ink, like you use for stamping. Stamp the ends of your stamps and stamp out the letters so that you can see the placement and that sort of thing. It might help you with that. It's not anything that's important in the land of Tracy. Tracy likes things that a little bit off and a little bit crazy. So I have got to my very last letter here. So far so good, and I'm going to do my final letter stamping there. Again, if you made a mistake, didn't get the words, or I'm sorry, the letters exactly where you want them, don't sweat it. You've got more metal. You can just go start again. Just have some fun with it. The more stamping you do, the more comfortable you'll get with your placement. the more familiar you'll get with the stamps that you're using, and it will all turn out really nice. So just be patient with yourself. Practice, practice, have fun. So I stamped a couple more words, used a different font up here, and obviously went in a different direction there. We darkened them just so that you could see them on camera here. Normally I wouldn't be darkening them until after I'd done all of my stamping. I wanted you to be able to see that clearly. Now, it's my suggestion that you think about doing little test stamps of some of the design stamps that you might consider using. And I could show you the perfect example down here at the bottom. I've started here, didn't quite get it all, still working it, and finally got to the point where I was comfortable stamping with that stamp. All these design stamps work a little bit differently. They typically don't have a direction to them, so you need to decide how you want it to go on. And they take a little bit of practice to see exactly how they work. And I'll just move it down here so you can sort of see some of the different ones that I have had some fun with. And again, here we are, the bike ahead. Took me a few times to get comfortable. But I'd rather do that on the edge or on a separate piece rather than involving my words and having to start all over because I'm not happy with how the design stamps started out. Before I start doing the design stamps, I want to make sure that my metal is completely flat. And so as you're stamping the words, it often distorts the metal. I'm going to do this with a plastic mallet. I use the plastic mallet because it won't make any texture in the stamps. And the best way to do it is to actually flip the piece over and then flatten from the back side. And I'm just going to strike it on the block. And that will help to straighten the metal out so that when I start with my design stamps, I have the best shot of getting those on there nice and clear. So I've placed some of the design stamps on my charms, even done some just on their own there. And now my next step is going to be I'm going to flatten it out again and cut it out. So your next step is going to be to cut out your charm, and you're just going to use a standard pair of metal shears. You want to make sure that they are equipped to cut the gauge metal that you are cutting, and also that they don't have any serrations on the edges so that it's not leaving any kind of texture on the edge as you're cutting. They cut just like a pair of scissors. So when I'm cutting, I try to make sure that I don't get to the end of the shear as I'm cutting through the metal. That leaves a little kind of blip in the metal. If you do, try to make sure that I cut just little sections at a time. Let's see how I'm just cutting straight along my line and trying not to get right to the end of the shear until I get to the end of the metal. My next step is I want to cut out my individual charms from the strip that I have cut off of my piece of metal. And the only thing you really need to be aware of is that you want to leave space at the top, like I did on this one, for your hole punch. So leave a little extra on top. What you leave on the bottom is up to you. You may or may not be using this bottom section. If you already know that you want it to just be a small charm, you can cut that off right to the word, or you can leave it and allow yourself some decisions to be made later. So I'm just going to, again, use the shears if you're concerned about the line being perfectly straight or where you're going. Mark it with a marker, or be a risk taker like me and just cut. So as you can see, I've got enough space at the top, and then I can make decisions about whether I want to cut it down more narrow on the side or if I want to cut more off the bottom. So now that I have my charms cut, I've brought my sandbag in and I've put my bench block on top of it, and I'm going to use that to flatten now my pieces. And once again, I just flip them over, and I'm going to bring my plastic mallet and flatten them again. The process of cutting with the shears typically bends the metal, and I'll just show you on this one. You can see how that curves at, and you want these again to be flat. So I just flip it over, flatten, and now I am ready to start the next process, which is I'm going to texture the edges of my piece. I use a small embossing hammer. It's got a bald end to it. You can use, if you have a chasing hammer with a bald end, you can use that too. But I'm going to texture the edges, and I'm going to do that to give it a more finished look. It also smooths out the edges of the charm, so that way you don't have to file as much. And I do that by just placing my finger up close to the edge of the metal. You can kind of see how close it is. And I use my finger as kind of a guide to keep the hammer from going all over the metal. And this is just a gentle tapping. It's not a strong strike. You don't want to spread the metal out so much that you thin it out, make it sharp on the edges. And I just tap gently along the edge. You see how that's sort of given that little bit of an edging to it. You'll notice it a lot more when you see it antiqued, but just go along all four edges. There you go. Another tool that you can use for edging is the bald end of a chasing hammer, and it works the same way. Just tap the edges. Move around. Chasing hammers tend to be a little bit bigger than the embossing hammer that I was using, so be gentle. Next, I'm going to file the corners of my charm. I'm just going to use a fine to medium grade file, something that I can hold in my hand easily. And all I'm trying to do is knock the corners of my charm off. Just make it so that they're not sharp. They won't poke you when you're wearing it, putting it on your pieces. So I'm just going to go around, and when you're using a file, make sure that you're pushing down on the file and away from you as you file. And I don't make this a big deal. I just file that off until it's not sharp. It's kind of, you can test it, test drive it, see if it hurts, see if it pokes you. Just like that. Just a couple, 3-4 strokes is probably all that it's going to take to get those corners taken care of. So the next step is going to be to punch the hole in your charm, and my preferred hole punch is this 2-hole twist down type punch. It gives you 2 different sizes of holes that you can make with the same punch. I use the larger of the sizes, and I'm going to just line that one up on this, show you how that works. This is just twist up, twist down. I just take it and eyeball it. You don't necessarily want to shove this all the way in when you punch this hole, because that would be pretty deep. So just kind of eyeball where you want the metal to line up. The only thing that's really important is don't clip the edge. If it's important that it's in the center, you know, be mindful of that. You twist down until you'll feel it. The metal will be able to move freely at that point. And the important thing with these sort of punches is just untwist it all the way until the metal falls out. It's a good habit to get into. You won't be breaking your punch that way, the little pin. There we are. We've got a hole punched, ready for a jump ring. Next, I just want to talk a little bit about your choice of jump rings. As you can see with these 2 charms, I've punched a smaller hole in this one and a little bit larger hole in this one. And that way they can accommodate different size jump rings. When you're choosing your jump rings, you really want to have an idea of what you're going to do with your charm. If your charm is going to be used, let's just say, on an earring or even a necklace, you can choose to go with a little bit smaller gauge if you like. You could also go with a little smaller size if you like. Couple things that you want to keep in mind though is when I'm putting them on a bracelet, I definitely pick larger hole, heavier gauge. I'm a big fan of a 14 gauge jump ring, and that's what this one will accommodate. I want to make sure when my jump ring goes into my charm that there's movement, it's not stiff. I need to make sure that the jump ring is large enough so that when I go through the hole, it's not getting caught up on the edge of the charm. It not only goes through the hole and moves, but also moves just between the metal edge up here. So look at your jump rings, make some decisions about what you're going to do with your pieces, and then choose the appropriate jump ring for your project. And so this jump ring here is a 16 gauge jump ring, and it'll go through the smaller of the holes that I punched and still swing nicely. So next we're going to open the jump ring. My preferred tools are a flat nose and a chain nose for this. When I use my flat nose, I take it in this direction and grab it from the blunt end. And then I take my chain nose on its side and I open this jump ring from side to side. That way, and I just open it enough that I can scoop it into my charm. Don't want to open it up too much because it's hard to close back down and get into a nice round shape if you open it too much. But that's the chain nose and flat nose that are doing that job for you. So next I'm going to put my charm onto the jump ring. Just slide it on like so. Grab my chain nose for the other side here. And swing that closed. I like to move it back and forth so that it will settle right up in the center, close up nice and tight. You don't want to have any gaps where your charm can fall off. So here are some charms that I made, and I've antiqued these with liver of sulfur. If you have another antiquing solution that you like to use, that's fine. Just make sure you're following manufacturer instructions. I antiqued these with the jump rings in place because all of these jump rings were made with copper. If you're going to be mixing it up, maybe putting silver or brass jump rings with your pieces, mixing the metals up, make sure that you antique them separately and then put them on after you've antiqued them. So after you've antiqued, if you want to clean them up with a pro polish pad, that'll shine it up. And if you have a tumbler, it's a great way to polish these pieces. Throw them in the tumbler, let them tumble and shine themselves, and you can move on to making more charms. So you don't think I'd forget about the pre-made blanks. These are a great way to make charms. The outside edges are already cut and ready to go for you. Now one thing that you might find with them is some of them are going to have maybe some scratches in it. Some of the edges are going to be a little bit rough. If those scratches are something that you're not fond of, you could use a little fine grade steel wool on there, pro polish pad, even throw it in a tumbler for a while to get rid of them. Personally, I kind of like it. I use it as decorative texturing. That's what I like to call it, organic texturing. All of the edges on here can be dealt with the same way that we did our other charms, tapping the edges with the hammer. We can punch holes with the hole punch. Obviously, the stamping and that sort of thing are all going to be the same. What you want to make sure with these is that the metal is thick enough that you can stamp into it. Make sure when you're buying these blanks that they're at least 24 gauge for this project. That way you won't be cutting through the metal as you're stamping, and they're going to have a lot more stability to them in your pieces. I like to put my charms on charm bracelets, necklaces. I use them on earrings too. They're fun ways to custom pieces. For those of you that are beaders and want to add it to your beadwork, it's a great way to be able to sign your pieces, put your name on your charms. Lots of different uses. This is a little pendant piece that I've made, and I had left room at the bottom so I could punch a hole in the bottom of the charm. Hooked it together with a jump ring to another charm that I'd made, and voila, by the sea. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you have a lot of fun incorporating these fun charms that you've made into your work.